Is the Canon R5 a good camera for equestrian photography? Well, I just got my hands on one and I'm going to tell you all about it. Stay tuned. Last winter, I started hearing rumors the Canon was getting ready to release a professional quality mirrorless camera. And when I started reading up on the specs, I thought there is no way, this is too good to be true. But when Canon finally officially released details about the Canon EOS R5, I was so excited. Those things were true and then some. For the past few years, I've been shooting with a Canon 1DX and a 5D Mark IV. But on the side, I've been dabbling in mirrorless. I have a Fuji X-T3 and it's super fun to use. I wanted to love that camera, but trying to get the colors to match between the Fuji and the Canon proved to be a little more work and a little more challenging than I expected. So I've been biding my time waiting for Canon to come out with a great mirrorless because I wasn't ready to jump ship and go to Sony and sell all my Canon gear because I really do love the color and the contrast and just my workflow and all my gear. Everything is centered around Canon, and so that is why I waited. When I got the R5 and shared about it on social media, immediately I was flooded with questions. So I officially opened it up for questions. What do you guys want to know? So really, a lot of the rest of this video comes from your questions and things you wanted to know about the R5. First of all, what were my reasons for buying it? Well, my number one reason was the weight. I mainly shoot with the Canon 1DX Mark II with the 70-200 2.8 attached, and I weighed it and it's 6 pounds. And this is the R5 with the RF 70-200 2.8 attached, and it is 3 pounds. I actually have all sorts of problems with my back and shoulders and neck, and I have headaches and I have to see a massage therapist, and my hope is that switching to the lighter, smaller mirrorless system will ease some of that stress on my upper body. The second reason for me to buy this camera is the file size. In addition to portrait photography, I do a lot of commercial work for brands and businesses, and I want to be able to give them the biggest files that I possibly can. In addition, the large file size, 45 megapixels, allows me to crop in about half the image and still retain a very high resolution quality. That's a big bonus for me. Thirdly, is the video features. I have done video off and on in the past, but the in-body image stabilization of this camera means I can use stabilized lenses and non-stabilized lenses and have the benefit of stabilization. If you've ever tried to do video, you know you have to either have it on a tripod or a monopod or a Steadicam or a gimbal or something in order to get smooth footage. But especially when you're using image stabilized lenses with the image stabilized body, you get very smooth video. And lastly, because there's no mirror, what you see through the viewfinder is what the camera is seeing through the lens. So that means I won't have a series of photos that are underexposed or overexposed because I will know by looking through the viewfinder if my exposure is correct. So a number of people wondered why I got the R5 instead of the R6. And the bottom line is what I've already mentioned, file size. The work I do, the commercial work, and even some of the events I do where I maybe can't be as close to the horse as I want and I'll be able to crop in, these were big reasons to choose the R5. Now, that said, I've done a lot of research because I want to get another mirrorless camera. Do I get another R5 or do I get an R6? And really, besides file size and a few video features, the cameras are almost identical, but they're about $1,200 difference in price. So if you don't need the file size, you don't need to be able to crop in, you will benefit from all these other things I'm sharing today and spend less if you get an R6. Another question I get frequently is, can I use my EF lenses with the R5? And the answer is absolutely. There is an adapter, you just put it between the lens and the camera body and you're good to go. And the crazy thing is, I actually find my EF lenses work better on the R5 than they did on my DSLR cameras. I got my 85 1.2 out, which I never shoot at 1.2 because it's never sharp or in focus. And I thought, well, I mean, what the heck, let's try it. So I put it on, I took the pictures, they're just sharp. And I put my 51.2 on. I took photos of my dog Charlie, and they are sharp. So not only can you use your EF lenses, but they may actually work better. So if the EF lenses were great on the R5, why did I buy the RF 70-200? Well, I mentioned it earlier, it's the weight. This lens is about half the weight of the EF lens, and apparently it focuses a little faster. I really didn't notice a difference. There's one thing I'm not a fan of with this lens, and that is it's a telescoping zoom, but it's not a deal breaker for me. Something I was super excited about with this camera was Animal Eye autofocus. I'd watched all these videos about how it tracked bird eyes and dog eyes, and wow, that's so amazing. And so I got it home and I put it on horse eyes, and it was a little wah-wah. It wasn't that great. And I've talked with a couple people about it, and we wonder if their AI, artificial intelligence that determines what an eye is, just isn't exactly tuned into horse eyes. Now, that said, if you're fairly close, like when I was doing these black background photos, it did a decent job tracking the horse's eye. Where it didn't do well was sometimes it grabbed the horse's nostril, or it grabbed a pattern on this paint horse instead of the horse's eye. So it's a little hit or miss, and I feel like I still need some more time to kind of figure it out, but I'm not sure it has the same performance with horses that it does with other animals. Now, where this camera is absolutely amazing is with EyeAF and people. Now, since most of my photography is done with horses and people, this is the game changer for me. I did a 30-minute mini session with a mother and a son, and I had maybe one photo out of focus in 30 minutes with backlight and shade, and I mean, I could not believe it. That's never happened to me. I also went out and photographed my riding instructor, and I had her walking toward me. And when I have people walking toward me, generally I have to pick a focus spot where I think their face is going to be, and then hold down my focus button, and as they come toward me, it tracks focus. Well, with Human EyeAF, I am able to lock the focus box on her eye from anywhere. The box can be in the middle, and I put it on her face, and then I just keep it down, and I can recompose my scene any way I want, and it tracks her face. It follows it as she's walking toward me. It even followed her head when she was walking away from me. Now, this is a game changer for me compositionally, because a lot of times I'd have to focus and recompose, or pick a spot over here, or pick a spot way up at the top, or whatever. But now I can just say, this is the face I want you to follow, put the box there, and then no matter what I do with my composition, it stays with the face. This is remarkable. This is game changing, and it's very accurate. I have rarely had it actually lose the person's face in the midst of taking photos. Now, that's with portraits, so I wanted to try some action where people were riding horses and see if it would track the person in those scenarios, and I found it to do a pretty amazing job. I did some photography in this lovely indoor arena, and it did a great job tracking faces, whether they were coming toward me or away from me or to the side. And then I went outside and I photographed a rider going over some jumps, and it did a pretty darn good job of staying with her face. A couple weeks ago, my friend Anna Mullins of Purple Horse Photography was on her way to the Young Horse Finals in Tryon, North Carolina. She stopped in at a camera shop. They happened to have an R5 in stock, which is rare, by the way. They're very back-ordered at the moment. And on impulse, she bought it. And she bought the RF 70-200, and she took it to a horse show. She had a lot of experience. She had like 3 or 4 days to play with it. And I just want to share a little bit about her experience, because I don't do this kind of photography as much. And so her experience may speak to those of you that do horse shows. First of all, she was photographing young horses at liberty, running through a chute and going over jumps. And the R5 pretty much failed to track focus. And what she found was that she ended up having to go back to finding a focus point and shooting just in the way that you do with the DSLR. And it performed normally, equivalent to a 5D or a 1DX. But when she was trying to do the object tracking autofocus, it would find people and horse brushes and nothing at all sometimes. And so that was a little bit of a frustration and a little bit of a disappointment for her. She also found that the camera had about a 50 millisecond lag time from what she was used to. And she says not a deal breaker, but it's definitely noticeable, especially when you're someone like her that really knows your timing. You know how your camera reacts when you push the shutter button. And And so that's just something else to be aware of. The upside for her, she said, is the same thing, the upside for me, it's the weight. Normally she would have to have a tripod or a monopod throughout the day just to give her arms and her back a break, but with this camera setup, she didn't have to do that at all. Anna told me that in spite of the challenges, the R5 has been a fun adventure. Now I'm sure some of you are wondering, is there an increase in image quality? And honestly, I haven't really noticed a huge difference. The main difference I notice is because the file sizes are so much bigger, there's more detail in the images. I haven't noticed a big difference in like dynamic range or color or anything like that, but that extra detail is really, really nice. I love having just that clarity and the sharpness that comes from just more pixels in my image. One question people always have when a new camera comes out is how good is it in low light? And I will say the R5 is very good. I wouldn't say it's exponentially better than the cameras I was using previously, but I would say like 6400 ISO on those cameras would be more like 8,000 or 10,000 ISO on the R5. I had a couple of opportunities to work in low light. I photographed my riding instructor in this indoor arena, and this is a low light situation. Even though there's lights on and there's some light coming in from outside, I'm still at 8,000 ISO in order to have my shutter speed high enough to freeze the motion of the horse. I also put it to the test in this very low light situation. The sun had already set, we were in the indoor arena with all the lights off, and there was just a bit of glow in the sky that was coming through the window, and I was able to create sharp, clean images at 6400 ISO, f2.8 at 1/200th of a second. I also was able to test the low light focusing capability when I was doing this setup with off-camera flash into a grooming stall. I didn't want to have any ambient light in the stall because it was mixing the color of light, and I wanted all my light to be coming from my flash. So that meant it was basically dark, and I needed my camera to be able to focus in the dark, and the R5 performed exceptionally, way beyond my expectations. Some of you have asked about the large file sizes. Is it hard to handle? How do they edit? And what I'll say is it's gonna fill up your hard drive space, it's gonna fill up your memory cards, takes longer to import into Lightroom, but that's really the only thing I noticed. And I discovered in the last few days that Canon has a new RAW format called compressed RAW, and it basically cuts your file size in half, and there is no noticeable difference in image quality. And even one article I read, they talked to somebody at Canon and a buddy at Canon, and he said, no, you're really not going to notice a difference. So I am switching to the compressed RAW, and I'm hoping that that'll help save speed and space, those two things. Now, as far as editing in Lightroom goes, the one thing I really ran into is there's no native camera profile in Lightroom for the Canon R5, and I always use the camera profiles. So I figured this has probably got to be an issue for everybody, because when I import it and it applies an Adobe profile, my images look flat and awful. So I went out and Googled it, and there's a guy who has developed a Canon profile that you can purchase. It's like $15, and it does a wonderful job. Once I applied that profile and my former preset, pretty much things look the way I expected them to. I'll put a link to that profile in the description, so if you get yourself a Canon R5, you'll be able to get that profile as well. I had a lot of questions about the shutter, electronic shutter, mechanical shutter, and what I'll tell you is that I plan to use the mechanical shutter most of the time. And the reason is I actually like to hear the shutter sound. Electronic shutter basically opens the shutter and it stays open and it just takes pictures. And the problem with that, there's no sound. There's like no feedback that you're taking a picture, which I find kind of weird. And I think especially if I was doing a portrait session, would be really, really weird for the person. And I just found electronic shutter to be a little disconcerting. Like, I didn't know if I was taking the picture, how many pictures I was taking. I mean, it flashes the screen, but it's just not the same feedback as hearing it. Now that said, the electronic shutter is faster. So if I needed 20 frames per second, I would probably choose the electronic shutter. There are very few instances where I need 20 frames per second. The mechanical shutter is 12 frames per second, which is only 2 frames slower than my 1DX Mark II, which I bought specifically to increase my frames per second. And so the problem with the electronic shutter, and it's a known problem, it's been a problem forever, is that you get something called rolling shutter, where you are panning the camera and all the vertical lines kind of start to bend forward. And the faster you pan, the more they bend. And I would say it's moderate, maybe mild. I don't have a lot to compare it to, except my Fuji, which would really bend the lines. So I feel like the rolling shutter is better with this camera, but they certainly didn't eliminate it or totally fix it. Where I would find it useful is maybe if a horse was coming toward me or a herd was coming toward me, or across at an angle where I'm not panning this to this really fast. When the Canon R5 first came out, it was notorious for overheating. If you took too many photos in a short period of time or too much video, it would count down and then you had to let it cool off. And I personally have not run into overheating. That said, Anna did at the young horse trials. The first day she was shooting like a madwoman and she ran into an overheating warning, but it never made her stop taking pictures. So I don't think for the average photographer it's going to be an issue, but because I haven't had the camera super long, I can't say it will never be an issue. I've had a chance to do a little bit of video with this camera, and I am really excited about the results. Its ability to maintain focus on my subject and be fairly stable with that in-body stabilization I mentioned earlier, it's pretty wonderful. I will say that when I was at the long end of my zoom, I still got quite a bit of camera shake, but when I switched to a 24-70, I could easily handhold the camera and have fairly smooth footage. I also did some shooting in an indoor arena, and I was shooting in slow-mo, and you absolutely can handhold that situation because the slow motion really eliminates any camera shake you might have. So I'm very excited to do more video with this camera and just be able to offer that to my clients, both my portrait and commercial clients, and have it just be a much easier process for me. The only problem I ran into was in trying to record 120p slow motion. Apparently my cards are not fast enough. I mean, I spent hundreds of dollars on these memory cards and they aren't quite fast enough. So I would start to film 120p and then I would get like, I don't know, 15-20 seconds and it would say, yeah, no, can't do it. And so before I start doing a lot of video with this, I'm going to have to get a faster card. So please be aware of that. I'll put a link in the description to a list of cards that are compatible with 120p video. So there's been some talk about the camera not having good battery life, and I have actually not run into that. I think this camera has a better battery life than my 5D Mark IV, and that might be because my 5D Mark IV batteries are all so old that they can't even keep a charge anymore. But my R5 batteries I bought new, and I can get through an entire session on one set of batteries. That said, I do turn off the camera between shoots, which I didn't used to do before. With my DSLRs, I just left them on all the time, let them go to sleep. But because the screen is on whenever I'm not looking through the viewfinder, I felt like it would be better to just get in the habit of turning the camera off. One concern I've heard from a lot of photographers is how steep is the learning curve going from DSLR to mirrorless. And I'm going to be honest, it's a little bit steep. It's steeper than I expected. Having dabbled in mirrorless, I thought, oh, I got this, I know how to do this. And getting this camera and actually starting to set it up was a little more challenging than I expected. You know, going from a 5D Mark I to 2 to 3 to 4 and even the 1DX, they're all pretty much the same. There might be some new features in each one, but this is kind of a whole new animal. Not to say it's totally different, but like there's an LCD screen on the top. There's no white balance button anymore. There's a dial for ISO that I always go in the wrong direction. And there's just a lot of changes in the menus too. And so I spent probably more time watching YouTube videos and reading articles on how to set up the camera than I have actually trying to use the camera. That's how much of a learning curve it is. And what I'm going to do for you is shorten the learning curve or flatten the learning curve just a little bit. And I made a PDF of all my camera settings, you know, as they are today, and I'll try and keep it updated as I learn more. But all you have to do is go to the link in the description and put in your email and I'll send you a nice PDF. And when you get your R5, you can just go through the settings and set it up like I do as a starting point, and then you figure it out for yourself from there. So moving forward, I'm gonna phase out of DSLR gear. I'm gonna keep my EF lenses for now and use them with the adapter. But I often shoot with 2 cameras, and I really cannot see myself having a mirrorless on one side and a DSLR on the other. I think it would fry my brain because the interfaces are so different, and the electronic viewfinder versus the mirrored viewfinder, I think it would be really tough on me. So in the next 6 or 8 months, I'm gonna pick up another R5. I really considered the R6. I really, really did. But again, when I do the commercial work, I wanna have those large file sizes, and I want the interfaces to be exactly the same, because a lot of times I'm switching between the two. One has a long lens on it, the other has a wide angle, and I just don't want to have to think, oh, which one is this, and how the dial's different. You know, there's a few interface differences. So that is my plan. To answer the original question, is the R5 a good camera for equestrian photography? I would say it's a great camera for equestrian photography. The autofocus capabilities alone have sold me on this camera. But in addition to that, the weight for a lot of us photographers who end up carrying a camera around for long days is really going to make a difference. The file sizes, the electronic viewfinder, I mean, there's just so much to love here. I hope this video has been helpful to you. I hope if you haven't considered the R5 or the R6, that maybe this is making you think about it. I really believe the future is mirrorless. Canon is not putting any energy anymore into their DSLR EF lineup. Everything is going mirrorless, it's going RF, and it's the technology of the future. So if I were you and you're looking for a new camera, just skip right to mirrorless. Just don't get another DSLR, skip right to mirrorless. Well, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, maybe leave a nice comment, and if you're on YouTube, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching, and have a wonderful day.